Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to the sheep pen, bah, where no goats are allowed. What would you do for a Klondike bar? Klondike bars are not sponsoring this program. That was a random reference, because today we're talking about selling your soul to the devil. Don't. No, this is not a coffee talk. You know, there's an old saying: every man has his price. Everyone can be compromised if you offer them the right thing. It's a demonic concept. Unfortunately, it tends to be more true than we'd like to admit. The old saying is anyone can be bought. Well, I can't be bought because if you've watched my channel for some time, you know that they tried to buy me when I was a young man. They offered me everything. They offered me the shot at the big time and whatever fringe benefits, fringe, not French, fringe benefits I wanted. They offered me even the most disgusting thing you can think of. They offered me all the drugs I could do and a doctor to keep me alive while I did them. And they were very upset to hear that all I wanted was to be recognized for my skills and ability by my peers and by the industry, the music industry. But they told me that I would have to forsake my religion and my faith and acquire whatever religion or faith they assigned to me, and that they could reassign that whenever they wanted. And as long as I would do that, that they would give me whatever I wanted, and every dream or fantasy I ever had would come true, as long as I made music for them, the Beast System. You can see that video by looking in my top videos or most popular video section on my YouTube channel, as it's one of the top 10 videos. It's called My True Crossroad Story. But it leads me to the big question: can people be bought? You know, sometimes it is that people sell their souls for something simple, something as small as a Klondike bar, something as small as a moment of pleasure. You know, there's a story in the Bible. It's at the literal foundation of the children of Israel that the name Israel comes from a man, Jacob, who was renamed by God, by an angel. After battling with him, he was given the name of Israel. But originally, he was Jacob, the fraternal, non-identical twin of Esau. And when Esau and Jacob were born, Esau was actually delivered first. So he was given the eldest son position, even if it was just by a few moments. And he was considered the rightful heir to Isaac's fortune, and he would become Isaac's heir. And Jacob, there's a long story as to why this is, but Jacob was always desirous of that. He felt like he should have been born first. There's even a story where Esau pulls Jacob out of the birth canal and takes his place and to be born first. And that's why Jacob always felt like he deserved to be the rightful son of Isaac. But in reality, it had more to do with the fact that he spent time with his father. He did things for his dad. He was present in the home. He was a good boy, where Esau was an outlaw and a wild man, and a man who spent more time in the woods than home with his family. And so while out in the field, or actually, I think it might have happened at home. I should have probably read up on this. I'm going from memory, but you know, I know the Bible really well. It's just some of the details. But nonetheless, Jacob had made a red stew. Y'all ever had a beef stew on a cold day? I wouldn't sell my soul for it, right? But it's pretty darn good. And Esau had been out in the woods for some time. And Esau returns home and he's starved to death. And Jacob has possession of this stew. And Esau wants a bowl, and he wants it right now because he's hungry. Give me some of that soup. And Jacob tells him, I'll give you some soup if you give me your birthright. And this is something that I think Esau at the time didn't really value. He didn't think that that deal would be held up under scrutiny. And he said, sure, I'll trade you my birthright for a bowl of soup. Well, as it turns out, Isaac, their father, that's all he needed. Jacob was his favorite anyway. And Esau was stupid. He showed how little his birthright meant to him by selling it for a pot of stew. And Isaac Isaac chose Jacob as his heir. Now, there's also part of this where he tricked the old man. But nonetheless, it's a bone of contention. But the moral of the story, and the reason I present it in this instance, is that sometimes we so value the afterlife, we so devalue it, we value it so little that we're willing to give it up for something small, like a Klondike bar or a bowl of soup. One day I was at the feed store, and there was a young lady behind the cabinet. It was behind the counter. It was a busy Saturday afternoon, and I purchased a bag of feed for my animals, and it was like $16.95, something like that. And I gave her a $20 bill. Now, we were talking about the weather. It was a beautiful spring day. The store was kind of busy. She rung me up, and when she counted back my change, which should have been somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 in coins, she starts laying out $20 bills. So she gives me the $3 in the coins. That makes 20, 40, 60, 81. And I'm standing there with $83 in my hand. I just froze. I didn't know if there was cameras or not. Doesn't matter. I just wanted to make sure that she didn't mistake what was happening there. And I just froze, and I said, "Are you sure you counted that right?" And she goes, yeah, that was $83 and something cents. And I said, "But I gave you a $20 bill." And she went, blink, 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 blink. What? She popped over the register, and there was a $20 bill in the slot where she normally puts a $100 bill. And she said, "Why did I think that was a $100 bill?" She said, "Wow, you could have just walked away. You could have made $80 there." And I said, "Ma'am, my integrity is worth a whole lot more than $80. And I'm not giving up my ride to heaven for $80. That my character and my integrity is worth way more than $80. Little did she know that I had previously been offered millions and millions of dollars, whatever I wanted, the sky, if I would give up my integrity and my salvation, and I refused to. So many people in that situation would have chosen the dishonest route and made $80. It was free and clear. She put it in my hand. I didn't steal it. We start to rationalize how what we're doing isn't all that bad when weighed against what you get in return. What would you do for a bowl of stew, $80, or a Klondike bar? Once again, not sponsored by Klondike. My grandmother, you've heard me talk about her. She's the kind of woman that I told the story about how when she had a newborn baby and her husband left unexpectedly and didn't come back, and the rent went unpaid and she became homeless, that she put a baby on her hip and she walked across the entire state of Oklahoma to make it to Arkansas, where there were family. And she set out with nothing but the clothes on her back and a baby on her hip. That's the kind of personal strength my grandmother had, and she was the ripe old age of 18 when that happened to her. But late in life, she found herself a widow. It's a whole nother story, because they called her the Black Widow. My grandmother eventually would bury 7 husbands, but to the point where she wouldn't marry the last husband for the longest time. For many years, they just stayed friends, because she wouldn't marry him, because she was afraid if she married him, he would die. And even though he was 25 years younger than her, when they got married, he in fact did pass away rather quickly, and she ended up nursing him, and he thought he was going to be nursing this old lady into her grave, and she buried her 7th husband. But that's a whole nother story. I could tell the story of all of those. My grandmother had an interesting life. It runs in the family, we'll put it that way. But late in life, when she lived alone for so many years, and even when she had friends, like the man that would eventually become her 7th husband, she would not engage in sexual activity with them. Now, I don't necessarily share my grandmother's same strong sense of ethics as far as where she draws the line. I would draw my line a little differently. To me, that $80 theft would have been a much bigger deal than a roll in the hay. Feel free to place your priorities as far as what is sin and what isn't, and what is bad and what's worse yourself. But as for myself, I draw a different line than her. But nonetheless, I have to respect her strength and her ethics, because she would tell people, "You know what? I like sex just as much as any other woman. I'm just not willing to go to hell for it." Right? Well, when I have been, let's give you another non-spiritual example of the same sort of thinking. that when I was single and being a wild swinging single, I would always wear a condom when I was with anybody in a sexual way. And people would often hate that about me, and just like try to get me to drop it. And I would say, look, I like sex, I just don't like it well enough to die for it. Right? So when I was a youth pastor, many of you know I was a youth pastor. I had a very large youth group that turned into a regional youth movement. And I had in my youth group one of the lowest rates, a zero rate of pregnancy within my youth group. So there were no young girls in my youth group getting knocked up, so to speak. It just didn't happen in the 4 years I was there. And it wasn't by accident. And I was under a lot of pressure all the time by parents to be what I used to call a human condom. I would tell them, look, it's not my job to run around between these teenagers and keep them from having sex with each other. If you think that's your job, to run around in the dark with a flashlight at every campground, you get your own youth pastor job. But as far as I'm here, I'm trusting my teenagers to do the right thing. And one would think, to have a zero rate of pregnancy in this modern time in a youth group, that I must have been preaching against premarital sex all the time. I never preached against it, not once. But I did preach all the time on being in charge of your life. I preached all the time on reaching your destiny as a young Christian. I preached all the time about God's plan for your life. And when I did talk about sex and teenagers, when I was preaching to teenagers, I didn't instruct them that they were going to hell, or threaten them with hell, or I tell you what I did do is I laid out clearly the consequences of what that can mean. I talked about how that's a very adult decision to have sex with someone, and the event could become life-changing. What could start out as fun between two teenagers could alter your life forever. You could become pregnant. You could get a venereal disease, a big one, a deadly one, an incurable one, right? And you could become pregnant, and that even if you were on birth control is not 100%. And there's lots of people that have got babies while they were on birth control. And then I painted the picture of being a young single mom, or a young boy who was saddled with child support and the job of co-parenting for the rest of their lives. Really, it's a job that never ends. You just go from parent to grandparent in most cases. But I got real results, not from scaring them, but from showing them that one moment of pleasure can lead to a lifetime of problems. One moment of pleasure can cost you your life. How many men, I just recently watched the story of some of these fallen ministers who got caught in some very bad situations and then lied like crazy to avoid being found out. Ted Haggard is a guy that continued in his ways even after he said he'd quit. He just kept getting caught over and over again. And everyone wants to talk about Haggard's sexual issues, but they always leave out the fact that every time he was involved in one of these sexual issues, it was also present was methamphetamines, and that he really had a meth addiction that was driving his behavior. And he never, in my opinion, got control of that. Who knows where he's at right now, but I kept seeing him in these biographies relapsing into addiction. And, he got busted, and he lost his ministry. He got discredited. He lost a multi-million-dollar ministry. He ended up basically having church in his garage to a handful of people before it was all over. That he was sat down, disciplined, and in many cases defrocked. I believe he was defrocked and stripped of his authority in his ministry. And for what? A 12-hour high? An 8-hour high? A sexual encounter with someone while he's high? He risked everything. He sold his soul for 12 hours of pleasure, or maybe 2 hours of pleasure. He had to lie to his wife. He lied to his kids. He lied to his church. He lied to his family to cover it up. And it went on and on for years. When the truth finally came out, we knew. He sold his soul for a bowl of soup. He sold his soul for a Klondike bar. I had such a low rate of teenage pregnancy in my youth group because I taught consequences. I didn't just use fear of an unknown future. You know, the rapture preaching was a big thing in the 80s and 90s in the churches that I worked in. And there were constantly people preaching that left behind logic. Oh, you better not do that, you'll get left behind. And they also talked about how Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming. And one of my mentors had a teenage daughter at the time. And he got shocked when his daughter says, I don't want Jesus to come back. He said, honey, why don't you want Jesus to come back? And she said, because I want to live my life and have a long life, and I want to get married and have kids, right? And you could use that to teach a myriad of lessons about that doctrine. But one thing that stuck out to me is that that girl didn't worry about some faraway heaven and hell. She didn't worry about some unseen world. Her concern was the life she was living right now, the place she found herself right now. And so I use that same sort of logic to not scare people with a future unforeseeable heaven or hell, but painted the picture of heaven and hell in their life right now. You know, choosing your integrity, choosing to say no to a momentary pleasure or a momentary cash payout, in not just for your future in the spirit realm, but for your future in this life. That, you know, there's a million ways to get it wrong and only a few ways to get it right. You could end up in prison. You could end up in an unwanted pregnancy. You could end up with a venereal disease. You could end up with an addiction you can't shake. You could end up in divorce court. You could end up homeless, living in a box because of the decisions that you make. Because ethics aren't just about heaven and hell in the afterlife, because heaven and hell is now. The Bible tells us that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That means you can reach out and grab it. That every choice you make every day builds one kingdom against the other. There are two kingdoms locked in an eternal battle, the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. Every decision you make builds one kingdom at the expense of the other. And both kingdoms are not a future place, but a place that exists right now. The kingdom of heaven is right now. Hell is right now. And the choice is yours. What path will you choose? Will you take the $80? Right? Will you take the deal with the devil? Will you sell your soul for a bowl of soup? Or will you stand in your integrity, stand in your ethics, and choose heaven? Because guess what? When when Esau gave up his birthright, he gave up everything. He could have been, the children of Israel could have been named Esau, after Esau. Right? He could have been the rightful heir, but it didn't mean anything to him. He sold it out for momentary pleasure. Haggard could have gone on to be one of the greatest ministers in our world, but he could not say no to his desires. He couldn't choose his integrity over the Klondike bar. This could be said for anybody that falls from grace. That within each of us, whether you base your integrity, your ethical line on the Ten Commandments, or on the words of Jesus, or on the words of Buddha, or on the words of what your grandma and grandpa told you what was right and wrong, maybe you're not even religious. But when you give up your ethics, there's a reason those lines are there, and they're not just about heaven and hell. When you choose the easy way out, when you go around work to take the day off when you know there's things to do, it has an effect on your life. Many of you today are sitting on piles of wrong decisions, piles of mistakes. I don't care if you're the CEO of a corporation or if you're a homeless guy living in a box. You got there because your life is based on a series of ethical decisions. What decision will you make? When that time comes, what is your price? Do you have a price, or are you unbuyable? Is your ethical backbone so strong that no one can dissuade you from what you know is right? Now, I'm not talking about claiming, things and not having, not understanding them. I'm not saying toe the party line, that something's wrong just because somebody said so. But in each of us, we decide where our ethical line is. And every time you cross it, it turns out to be a mistake. And there are consequences for that in this life as well as the other life, the afterlife. Because one thing I have learned in my search for truth, in my search for God, in my search for righteousness, is that God's kingdom is on this earth and in the future and in the past. That it is above time. That the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness transcend time. They're timeless. And it's not some future heaven that we're working towards. Yes, that's part of it. It's not some future hell we're trying to avoid. Yes, that's part of it. But heaven and hell can be right now based on what decisions you make. Temptation is brought to us by the enemy, but righteously and rightfully so, God also tempts us with the truth. God also enlightens our path. The decision is always clear unless your mind is clouded with desire. The decision is clear and we violate our own ethics anyway. You know, if people just had more backbone, if people just stuck to their ethics, not someone else's decision about what's right and wrong, but your own. We violate our own principles when the price is right, when you're thirsty enough, when you're hungry enough, when you're desperate enough. This is why greed, envy, and covetousness is a sin. You shouldn't want things beyond your reach. You should want attainable things, righteous things. You know, my dad, the old Marine and preacher, used to preach a sermon, and the hook of it was, he prayed that God would make the want to match the ought to in your life. When your ethics are aligned properly, when that ethical line is aligned properly in the best interest for what is best for you in your future, not just in this life, but in the next life, not just in the next life, but in this life, when they're aligned properly, then if you don't violate them, you're going to gain the positive elements, the positive things that we call blessings. That choosing to do the right thing is always rewarded. Choosing to do the wrong thing is always punished. You might think you're getting away with it, but trust me, you planted the seed of your own destruction. When you violate your own ethics, just think what the world would be like if we just stuck to our own ethics. Hey, some people got different ethics. You know, the blue-haired leftist has got different ethics than the little old gray-haired lady down at the Pentecostal church. But let's just say all of us refuse to violate the ethics that we have. And I think there's one ethic that almost everyone can agree on. This is why the law of love and the golden rule replace so much minutia, so much of the detailed law, so many Pete Inkland little laws that everyone argued about all the time, whether they were valid or not. They really got replaced with them two basic concepts. Love the Lord with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Love yourself, love your neighbors, love God. Love God, love people. And the other one is never treat anybody in a way that you wouldn't want to be treated. One of the quickest ways to out a hypocrite is to flip it. If somebody is justifying their behavior towards another person and you know it's wrong, flip it. Put them in their shoes. It's like the old Native American saying, you can't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his moccasins. So when someone's trying to justify something they're about to do or just did to somebody else, just flip it and say, how would you feel if that was done to you? If you were in that situation, would you like to be treated that way? Even the most dishonest and gaslighting narcissist has to take a pause and tick a couple of moments before they can jump back to that, because when you flip it, it's not justifiable when you trade places in your mind with that person. One of the things people hate about me is I'm a mirror. I will hold the mirror up and make you look at it whether you like it or not. Because unless you have a mirror, you will self-justify everything you do. You'll violate your own ethics. You'll sell your soul for a Klondike bar and think nothing of it because you think you can work it out in the long run. It's not going to catch up to you. It always does. Whether you call it sowing and reaping or karma or God's judgment, whatever your personal adjective or noun is to describe that, it's a thing. What comes around goes around. And righteousness is always rewarded. And evil is always punished. And when we make evil decisions for momentary pleasure, it's forgivable. It takes repentance. It takes a determination to not live that way anymore. It takes a recognition that what we did was foolish, not just wrong, not just a violation of God's ethics, but we violated our own ethics because we knew it was wrong when we did it. You know, I've known lots of guys who would, I'm a musician, so I was raised around musicians and worked with them and been friends with them. All my friends have been musicians and preachers. And one thing I can say about musicians is they get around. And some of my friends had no problem carrying on extramarital affairs with other men's wives. But when that situation got flipped and it was their wife being unfaithful, they were unforgiving. They were hateful. They were enraged. They would go on a rampage. You see, hypocrisy is at the core of that. Self-delusion. You can't see that you wouldn't want that done to you. But so many times in the moment, people make decisions based on desire. And in so many ways, they're selling their soul to the devil for a moment of pleasure, for $80, for a Klondike bar, for a bowl of soup. Sometimes people sell their souls and lie and deceive other people just so they don't have to be blamed for a mistake or be blamed for a bad decision. That some people will just throw their own soul under the bus to protect a facade, a false image they present to the people of the world, to protect their reputation. People often do things that if the situation was flipped, they would feel like they've been treated unjustly. But when they're on the other side of it, they believe they're just in this self-delusion. In reality, in their heart of hearts, they all know they sold their soul for a bowl of soup. They sold their birthright. When we make decisions that please the devil, we're signing allegiance with the devil. You're like, you're not really selling your soul. No, you are. You really are. Every time you violate your own ethics, you're signing on with the demonic. My dad used to define sin as the willful disobedience of the known will of God. And I think most people, their ethical line, they connect with, whether they admit it or not, even if they're atheists, they connect that with right versus wrong, good versus evil. I'm not saying forget about God's laws, but I'm saying at least value your own ethics. At least don't self-justify. Don't do things to other people that you wouldn't want done to you and then flip it around and go, I was okay to do that. That was fine. It's self-justification to get the bowl of soup. It's self-justification to get the Klondike bar. I could have taken the deal with the devil. I could have been a big star. You've heard me play. They offered me the deal for a reason. The thing I don't talk about too much is that they really didn't want my band either. They told me they could put whatever band or singer behind me. They just wanted my talent. They wanted my interpretation of music. They wanted my soul in the literal and metaphorical way. They wanted that energy that I brought. They wanted to put that lightning in a bottle. And they were willing to pay big for it. But it had to come with total surrender to the dark side. When you violate your own ethics, you're siding with the dark side, whether you realize it or not, whether you admit it or not. That's what you're doing. That ethical line you've drawn for yourself is based on whether you admit this or not. Everyone bases that ethical line we all have on what we believe is right and wrong. To violate our ethics, we know on a almost subconscious level that it's embracing the demonic, embracing evil, that it's denouncing God, devaluing God, devaluing that birthright, the value of it. Whether you sell it for $1 million or a bowl of soup, it's worth way more than that. Your blessings in this life are worth way more than money can buy. There is no price big enough to take away my blessings. I won't sell it. I won't give it away, and I certainly won't compromise it. And if I do deceive myself, it behooves all of us, if that happens, to look in the mirror, or at least look when someone else holds up the mirror to you, and repent. Realize you have crossed an ethical line. Realize you violated your own belief system. Realize that you literally sold your soul for a bowl of soup or a moment of pleasure. Sometimes you sell your soul just for a laugh or some attention. The spotlight. As a musician and a public person, I know a thing or two about that. Keeping your own personal ethics, walking that line, walking the line, as Johnny Cash used to say. Because you're mine, I walk the line. I walk the line of my personal ethics, and it can't be bought for $80 or $80 million. Because the blessings of God are too grand to let escape through my fingers. And I won't let the blessings of God slip away. Joy, peace, and power in the Holy Spirit. Knowing who I am in God. Knowing that no matter what comes my way, I've got an army of angels at my back. I have the Holy Spirit enveloping me in peace. And I have Christ standing up for me on Judgment Day. And I won't give that up. Not for anything this world has to offer. It's why I don't pursue wealth. The Bible says it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get to heaven. Doesn't say it's impossible, just says it's dang hard. You could puree up that camel and squirt him through the eye of a needle. It can happen with enough force, but it ain't the easy path. It isn't the right path. And so I live in a cabin in the woods. I live on such a small amount of money. It doesn't take much donations from y'all to keep me going, but you do have to donate. I hope you enjoyed this sermon today. I hope it made you look at your own decisions. I hope in that moment when you're faced with giving up one of your ethics for something small, you'll think about this message and remember that you won't sell the blessings of God for a small sum. That the price is not high enough to buy it. You know, when Jesus started his ministry, Satan offered him the same deal. Just bow down and worship me, he said, and I'll give you everything you can see. The whole world is yours. And Christ denied Satan, and so should you. And in return, you have the blessings of God in this life and the next, eternal blessings. And if you don't, you will receive eternal damnation and your place in the lake of fire, which I don't talk about much, but I do believe is there. If this moved you, if you see the value in this ministry, if you're a regular viewer, please contribute to the cause. Keep me making videos. I'm an old guy and I can't work full time on a manual labor job and still make videos for you. So keep me in the saddle, keep me praying, keep me preaching, keep me bringing you the coffee talks and the things that you like. Keep this channel alive through your support, through a PayPal contribution in the description. There's a PayPal link. You can send money or gift cards to my P.O. box. And you can also write me if you'd like to talk. I'm very bad at getting back on my emails. They get backed up on me and I miss you, so just be persistent and you'll get a reply eventually. I thank you so much for all of the support you've given me, all of you who contribute to this. You've made it all possible, and there's not a day goes by that I don't think of the generousness that keeps me going here. And I'll leave you with this powerful prayer. May God surround you in his ring of fire and hedge of thorns of protection. May angels defeat the enemy and drive them from your midst. May mighty angels of sufficient rank and authority and number surround you and protect you from all temptation. And may you always have that voice in your head that says, not so fast. The price is too high. Choose your ethics. Don't give in to desire. We'll see you next time here on the Sheep Pen.